Mark never imagined a quiet winter walk could rewrite his entire life. The night was bitter and still when a faint, desperate whimper reached him from the roadside. There, half hidden in the shadows, a tiny black puppy trembled alone. No collar, no tag, only wide, pleading eyes. Who could leave something so fragile to the cold? Heart-twisting, Mark scooped the shivering creature into his arms, certain he was saving a helpless life. But what followed would reveal a reality so unexpected and extraordinary, it would shatter everything Mark believed and leave the world breathless. The evening air was cool and gentle, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass as Mark stepped onto the familiar sidewalk. He loved this time of day, when the noise of traffic softened and the sky burned with streaks of orange and violet. Each footstep fell in rhythm with the distant hum of crickets, a quiet soundtrack to his thoughts. It was the kind of peaceful summer evening when nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Mark's neighborhood curved like a lazy river, lined with tidy hedges and sleepy houses whose windows glowed warmly against the twilight. A few porch lights flickered on as he passed, their soft halos pooling across the pavement. He had walked this route countless times, a small ritual to shake off the weight of the day. Tonight felt no different, until a faint, almost imperceptible sound floated through the stillness. At first he thought it might be the wind threading through a drain pipe or the squeak of a loose gate. But then he heard it again, a delicate whimper, thin and high, like a question whispered into the dark. Mark slowed, heart giving a curious thud. The sound seemed to come from the narrow alley that split the row of houses just ahead. He tilted his head, listening. Another soft cry, unmistakably alive. Instinct tugged at him. He stepped off the main path and entered the alley, where shadows deepened and the air cooled further. His shoes scuffed quietly against the cracked concrete. The whimpering grew a fraction louder, guiding him like a fragile thread. Mark scanned the dim corners behind the trash bins near a sagging fence. Nothing moved, yet the cry persisted, urgent and small. Then at the far end of the alley where the fading light barely reached, something shifted. A tiny silhouette trembled near the curb, so slight he might have missed it if not for the flick of a tiny tail. Mark's breath caught. Whatever it was, it needed help. The evening that began so ordinary now carried a pulse of mystery, as if the night itself had drawn him here for a reason he could not yet name. Mark moved closer, careful not to startle the small creature. The fading light revealed a tiny black puppy no bigger than his two hands put together. Its fur was damp from the evening dew and clung to its thin frame, making it look even smaller and more fragile. Two wide, shining eyes stared back at him, eyes that seemed far too wise for such a young face. The puppy trembled but didn't try to run, as if it had been waiting for someone to come. He crouched down, speaking softly. "Hey there, little one. It's okay." His voice echoed gently off the walls of the alley. The puppy tilted its head but remained perfectly still. Mark extended a cautious hand, palm open. For a long breath, nothing happened. Then the tiny animal stepped forward with a hesitant wobble and sniffed his fingers. Its nose was cold and wet, a tiny spark of life against the night air. Mark checked instinctively for a collar or tag but found nothing. No name, no phone number, no clue about an owner. He glanced up and down the alley, hoping someone might appear to claim the lost pup, but the street remained silent. Porch lights glowed in the distance, indifferent and far away. A soft whimper escaped the puppy again, a sound that pressed straight into Mark's chest. He gently scooped the little dog into his arms. The puppy pressed against him with surprising trust, its small heartbeat fluttering against his palm. "You're all alone out here, aren't you?" he murmured. The thought of leaving it behind was unthinkable. Yet a sliver of unease crept into his mind. How had such a tiny creature ended up here with no one looking for it? As Mark stepped back onto the main path, the night felt subtly different. The quiet houses seemed to watch, and every shadow seemed to deepen. The puppy nestled against him, warm but strangely alert, its dark eyes never straying from the darkness behind them. What began as a simple evening walk was already turning into something far from ordinary, and Mark sensed this small rescue was only the beginning of a larger mystery. Back home, Mark set the puppy down on a soft blanket near the porch light and grabbed his phone. The night air had cooled, but his mind raced warm with questions. Someone had to be looking for this little one. He first retraced his steps, walking the quiet street with the pup cradled gently in his arms. At each house he paused, listening for barking or voices calling out, but only the low hum of insects answered back. He knocked on a few nearby doors, explaining to sleepy neighbors that he had found a stray puppy. Most smiled politely, shook their heads, and wished him luck. A retired couple across the street leaned over their gate, puzzled. "No one around here has a puppy that small," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "We'd know." Their certainty only deepened the mystery. Undeterred, Mark opened a local community app on his phone. He posted a clear photo and short message. "Found a very small black puppy near Willow Lane. No collar. Please contact if it's yours." The puppy sat beside him as if listening, its dark eyes fixed on the phone's glow. Within minutes, a few comments appeared, people offering kind words, others asking if it might belong to someone on another street, but no one claimed it. Next, he tried calling the nearby veterinary clinic's emergency line. The receptionist checked their lost and found records but came up empty. "If it's chipped, we can scan tomorrow," she offered. "But no reports tonight." Mark thanked her, a knot tightening in his stomach. Through it all, the puppy stayed unnervingly calm. No restless pacing, no desperate cries, just quiet watching, almost as if it understood the conversation and waited for a decision. Mark felt an unexpected weight in that silence, a sense that this wasn't a simple case of a pet slipping out a gate. With the night deepening and no owner in sight, Mark finally scooped the puppy back into his arms. "All right, little one," he whispered, feeling its tiny heartbeat. "You can stay with me tonight." As he turned toward home, the street seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that this choice had quietly set something larger in motion. Mark gently placed the puppy on a folded quilt in the corner of his living room, a spot warmed by the soft glow of a floor lamp. The little dog sniffed the blanket once, then circled twice before settling down with a quiet sigh. Mark fetched a shallow bowl of water and a small plate with bits of plain chicken, hoping to ease its obvious hunger. Yet the puppy only licked at the water and turned away from the food, ears twitching as if listening to sounds Mark couldn't hear. The house, usually comforting at night, felt strangely alive. Shadows from the curtains swayed across the walls, and the ticking clock sounded louder than usual. Mark sat nearby on the couch, scrolling through his phone to check for replies to his lost pet post. A few neighbors had left kind comments, but no owner had stepped forward. The mystery lingered like a low hum under the quiet. Occasionally, the puppy would lift its head and stare toward the hallway that led to the back door, its dark eyes unblinking. Once it even gave a low, almost inaudible growl, soft enough to question if Mark imagined it. He rose and checked every lock, peered through the back window and found only stillness outside. No movement in the yard, no stray animals. Yet when he returned, the puppy was still watching that same shadowed hallway, as though it sensed something he could not. Trying to ease the tension, Mark sat cross-legged on the floor and gently stroked the puppy's silky fur. The warmth of the tiny body soothed him, and for a few moments the strange unease faded. The puppy leaned into his hand, trusting and calm until its breathing deepened into a soft sleep. Mark stayed there longer than he intended, listening to the quiet rise and fall of each breath. Finally, he settled onto the couch with a blanket, not wanting to leave the puppy alone. The house seemed to exhale with him, but a question still pulsed beneath the calm. What had drawn this tiny creature to him? And why did the darkness beyond his hallway feel anything but empty? The night deepened until silence seemed absolute. Mark dozed lightly on the couch, the puppy curled in a tiny ball on the quilt nearby. A faint moonbeam slipped between the curtains, silvering the room. For a while there was only the quiet rhythm of breathing until a sharp sound pierced the stillness. It was a soft scratching at first, like tiny claws on wood. Mark's eyes flew open. The puppy was no longer on the blanket. Instead, it stood rigid by the back window, ears pricked and tail stiff. A low whine escaped its throat, rising into an urgent series of small barks that echoed unnaturally in the empty house. Heart pounding, Mark swung his legs to the floor. "Easy, buddy. What is it?" he whispered. But the puppy barely flicked an ear, gaze locked on the dark glass. Outside lay only the faint outline of the yard, and the old fence swaying slightly in the breeze. Still, the scratching sound returned, sharper this time, as if something moved just out of sight. He grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the door, the puppy trotting at his heels. The beam cut across the grass and trees, revealing nothing but quiet shadows. No raccoons, no stray cats, no movement at all. Yet the air felt different, charged, heavy. Mark's breath puffed in tiny clouds even though the night wasn't cold. Suddenly, the puppy darted to a spot near the kitchen floorboards, pawing furiously at a narrow seam where the wall met the wood. A soft growl rumbled in its tiny chest. Mark knelt beside it, pressing his ear close. For a fleeting second, he thought he heard something faint beneath the floor. A muffled vibration, a distant hum too low to place. Then it was gone. Mark exhaled shakily and carried the restless puppy back to its blanket. It refused to settle, eyes still trained on the hallway and door as though guarding against an unseen visitor. Long after he lay back down, the unease lingered. The house felt awake in a way he couldn't explain, and he couldn't shake the sense that this strange little guest had brought more than mystery to his quiet home. A thin stream of sunlight crept across the living room floor, warming the edges of the quilt where the puppy finally slept. Mark stretched awake, the memory of last night's scratching still vivid. The house looked ordinary again, but something about the silence felt loaded, as if the walls themselves were waiting. He brewed coffee, the familiar hiss and aroma filling the kitchen. Normally the scent alone stirred his appetite, but this morning it barely registered. His attention kept sliding to the puppy, which now sat alert at the back door. Its ears flicked at sounds Mark couldn't hear, and its gaze never wavered from the yard. "Breakfast time," he said lightly, setting down a bowl of water and a plate with softened dog food. To his surprise, the puppy only sniffed once, then backed away, tail low. Instead, it padded to the hallway and sat perfectly still, staring at the closed door that led to the yard. A faint whine escaped its throat, not from hunger but something harder to name. Mark stepped outside to reassure himself. The grass sparkled with dew. The neighborhood lay quiet under a pale sky. No footprints, no signs of intruders, just the rustling of distant leaves. Still, an odd feeling lingered, like the air carried a hidden vibration he couldn't quite catch. Back inside, he found the puppy exactly where he left it, eyes locked on the fence as though expecting something to appear. Mark crouched to meet its gaze, unsettled by the steady intensity in those dark eyes. It wasn't mere curiosity. It felt like vigilance. A chill slid down his spine. Whatever had disturbed the puppy in the night hadn't simply passed. Something out there, or maybe beneath them, was still holding the little dog's full attention. Late morning sunlight spilled across the porch when a sudden knock rattled the front door. Mark's heart jumped. Visitors at this hour were rare. The puppy, who had been sitting watchfully by the hallway, sprang up with a sharp bark that seemed far too fierce for its tiny frame. Mark hushed it gently and peered through the peephole. A tall man stood on the porch wearing a dark jacket despite the mild weather. His face was partly hidden beneath the brim of a cap. Something about his stillness, hands clasped loosely behind his back, set Mark on edge. He cracked the door a cautious inch. "Can I help you?" The man's voice was calm but carried an odd weight. "Good morning. Sorry to bother you. Did you happen to hear anything unusual last night? Strange noises? Maybe see anyone walking around?" His eyes scanned the interior over Mark's shoulder, sharp and searching. Mark hesitated. "I heard a few sounds. Nothing I could see. Why?" "Just routine," the man said quickly, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Some reports of wildlife in the area. We're checking for disturbances." He slipped a small card through the gap in the door. It bore only a phone number. No name, no company logo. Before Mark could ask another question, the visitor tipped his cap with a brief nod and turned down the path. The puppy growled low, following every step until the man disappeared around the corner. Mark shut the door and stared at the plain card in his hand. No explanation, no official markings, just that single number. The puppy pressed against his leg, still tense. A faint unease settled over the room, as if the knock had awakened something that wasn't finished with them yet. The stranger's visit replayed in Mark's mind long after the door closed. He turned the plain card over and over between his fingers, searching for anything more than that single phone number. Nothing. The puppy hadn't relaxed either. It paced near the door, ears twitching at sounds too faint for Mark to catch. Something about the man's brief questions and quick departure didn't sit right. Trying to distract himself, Mark knelt to check on his small guest. The puppy pressed close, seeking comfort, but as he ran his fingers through its soft black fur, something odd caught his attention. Near the back of the neck, right where a collar would normally sit, his fingertips brushed a tiny hard ridge beneath the skin. It wasn't a burr or a tangle. It felt deliberate, Mark gently parted the fur and found a nearly invisible seam stitched so finely he almost missed it. Beneath that seam rested a minuscule clear tube, no thicker than a matchstick, tucked neatly against the skin. His breath caught. This wasn't a normal microchip for lost pets. He recognized those from his previous dog. This was different. A small capsule sealed tight and carefully hidden. The puppy stayed perfectly still as he examined it, eyes wide and strangely knowing. Mark whispered, "What on earth?" The memory of last night's scratching and the mysterious visitor sharpened all at once. Maybe this little one hadn't simply wandered off. Maybe someone had hidden something inside or on it and wanted it back. He fetched a magnifying glass from a drawer. Under its lens he could make out faint markings along the microtube, like a string of tiny etched numbers or symbols. They were too small to read without better light, but they were unmistakably man-made. A cold ripple of unease slid through him. Could this be why the stranger came asking vague questions? Why the puppy refused food, stayed on edge, and listened to things beyond his hearing? The air inside the house suddenly felt heavy, the quiet loaded with meaning. Mark scooped the puppy into his arms, its small heart racing against his palm. "It's okay," he murmured, though the words were as much for himself as for the dog. Whatever mystery had begun in a quiet alley was now carved into the very skin of this tiny creature. And the reason for last night's strange noises and today's unexpected visitor was only growing more urgent. By late afternoon, a heavy gray sky had settled over the neighborhood, pressing down on Mark's unease. The puppy had been unusually quiet, no longer pacing or growling, just lying curled on the quilt. At first he thought it was finally tired, but a closer look turned worry into alarm. Its breathing was shallow, each tiny chest rise slower than the last. Hey, little one." Mark knelt, gently stroking the soft black fur. The puppy barely opened its eyes. A soft whimper escaped, weaker than before. Panic tightened his throat. He grabbed his phone and called the nearest veterinary clinic, explaining in clipped sentences about the sudden lethargy and the hidden capsule he'd discovered. "Bring it in right away," the receptionist said firmly. "We'll be ready." Minutes later, Mark was on the road, driving through a misting rain that blurred traffic lights into red smears. The puppy rested on a folded towel on the passenger seat, motionless except for the faint tremor of each breath. Every mile felt endless. He kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near the tiny body, whispering encouragements as if the dog could hear. "Hang on, buddy. Almost there." The clinic door chimed as he entered, the smell of antiseptic sharp and cold. A veterinary nurse rushed forward, lifting the small bundle with careful urgency. "We'll take it from here," she said, disappearing into the treatment room while Mark stood frozen by the counter. From behind the swinging door came muffled voices and the beep of monitoring equipment. A vet emerged briefly to ask questions. When symptoms began, any known injuries, any unusual objects on or in the puppy. Mark described the microtube hidden under the fur. The vet's eyebrows knit together. "That's not a standard ID chip," she murmured. "We'll scan it." Mark waited in the sterile brightness, heart pounding. Each minute stretched like an hour, the memory of the stranger's blank card burning in his pocket. He had no idea what the hidden object meant, only that the puppy's life seemed tied to it, and time was running dangerously short. The treatment room door finally swung open, and the vet motioned for Mark to step inside. The puppy lay on a padded table, an IV already delivering fluids. Its tiny chest rose more evenly now, though the sight of the small body connected to wires still tightened Mark's throat. Dr. Ellis, the attending veterinarian, held a handheld scanner and a laptop. "We ran a standard microchip check," she said, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. "What we found isn't standard at all." She angled the screen toward him. A string of complex characters glowed across the display, letters and numbers unlike any pet ID he'd ever seen. Mark leaned closer. "What does it mean?" "That's the strange part," she replied, tapping a key to enlarge the text. "It isn't a registration code. It's encrypted. And look at this," she pointed to a flashing red field. The system flagged it as priority clearance only. "We've never seen a chip trigger that." A low electronic beep sounded from the scanner, followed by a soft mechanical click, as if the device recognized something beyond its usual capacity. Dr. Ellis frowned. "It's broadcasting on a secondary frequency, one typically reserved for emergency services or government labs." The room seemed to shrink around Mark. Government? He repeated. It could mean many things, she said quickly, though her eyes betrayed concern. But the signal is live. Someone somewhere knows this animal is here. As if to punctuate her words, the clinic's phone rang sharply. The receptionist's muffled voice carried through the door. Yes. Yes, he's here with the puppy. A pause. Understood. Dr. Ellis exchanged a glance with Mark. That call came almost the moment we scanned the chip, she said softly. Whoever implanted that device, they were waiting for a signal. Mark's stomach tightened. The hidden capsule, the mysterious visitor, the restless night. They weren't random. Something larger was unfolding, and it had just been set in motion. He reached for the puppy's paw, feeling its faint warmth, and knew their quiet evening rescue had crossed into a world far beyond a simple lost and found. Before Mark could speak, Dr. Ellis's phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She answered, her tone professional but tense. Yes, this is Dr. Ellis. A pause, then a startled blink. You're already on your way? She glanced at Mark with a quick frown. Understood. She hung up and drew a steadying breath. That was unusual. A specialized emergency response unit says they're en route to this clinic. They knew about the chip's frequency before I even described it. They claim it's critical we keep the puppy stable until they arrive, within the hour. Mark's pulse thudded. Who are they? They wouldn't say. Just that they're authorized and carrying the correct access code. Dr. Ellis adjusted the IV drip and checked the puppy's vitals. Her movements brisk but careful. Whatever this is, it's far beyond standard veterinary care. The puppy stirred weakly, letting out a soft whine that pierced Mark's chest. He brushed a gentle hand over its small head, whispering, Hang in there, little one. Minutes dragged like hours. Outside rain intensified, tapping against the clinic's windows like impatient fingers. Each sound seemed louder than it should be. The hum of machines, the soft click of a distant door. Mark felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. A sudden flash of blue lights cut through the storm. Tires splashed to a stop outside. Through the glass front door, Mark saw a dark van pull up, its logo obscured by rain. Two people in gray uniforms stepped out, carrying metal cases and moving with urgent precision. Dr. Ellis tightened her grip on the scanner. That must be them. Mark stood, heart pounding, torn between relief and suspicion. Whoever these people were, they had arrived impossibly fast, as if they'd been tracking the signal all along. The tiny life on the table wasn't just a lost puppy anymore. It was the center of something far bigger, and the next few moments would decide whether its hidden secret would finally come to light. The clinic door swung open with a gust of damp air as two uniformed specialists entered. Their gray jackets marked only with a small silver insignia that meant nothing to Mark. One carried a sleek black case, the other a tablet that glowed with maps and code. They moved quickly but without panic, their steps purposeful. Mr. Harper? The taller one asked, addressing Mark by name, though he had never given it. Thank you for keeping the animal safe. We'll explain everything. Mark's stomach tightened. Who are you? What's going on? The man offered a calm, practiced smile. We represent a federal disaster response research division. That puppy isn't an ordinary pet. It's part of a specialized program, genetically enhanced scent detection. Canines designed to locate survivors in collapsed buildings and hazardous zones. He opened the black case to reveal sealed medical instruments and a thin document stamped restricted. Access. Dr. Ellis glanced from the device to the officials. And the implant? A core sensor, the second specialist explained, her voice steady. It's a miniature environmental monitor and biochemical analyzer. Unfortunately, this prototype suffered a containment malfunction during a field trial yesterday. We believe internal heat buildup triggered a failsafe, one that could have become fatal to the dog if not detected quickly. Mark's pulse quickened. So last night, the scratching, the growling. It was likely responding to the sensor's internal distress, she said. Its instincts told it something was dangerously wrong. The taller agent added, Your decision to bring it in for treatment saved its life. Without immediate care, the sensor's power cell might have overheated beyond safe levels. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor. Mark looked down at the puppy, suddenly seeing more than a lost stray. This tiny creature was a living piece of cutting-edge science and a survivor. The agent's gaze softened. We'll stabilize the implant and transfer it to a secure facility. But know this, you and your quick action prevented a tragedy. Relief washed over Mark, but so did awe. What began as a simple act of kindness had intersected with technology, danger, and a mission far larger than anything he could have imagined. When the procedure was complete, the specialists carefully disconnected the puppy's IV and set it gently in Mark's arms. The little dog blinked up at him, its eyes clearer now, a soft whimper rising like a sigh of recognition. Mark pressed his cheek to the tiny head, feeling a fragile warmth and the faint thump of a steady heartbeat. The taller specialist offered a rare, genuine smile. "You saved a life today. Two, really, if you count the lives this dog is meant to help in the future. Without your quick action, none of this would have been possible." Dr. Ellis nodded in agreement. Most people would have assumed it was just a stray. "You listened when something felt wrong." Mark swallowed hard, words briefly caught in his throat. "I just couldn't leave it there," he said quietly. The puppy licked his hand, a tiny gesture that felt like a thank you far deeper than words. For a long moment, the room held a gentle stillness, a contrast to the night of mystery and urgency. In that simple connection, warm fur against his chest, Mark felt the weight of everything lift, replaced by a quiet gratitude that needed no further explanation. The next morning, soft sunlight filtered through Mark's kitchen window as he sipped his first cup of coffee. The house finally calm. The events of the last 24 hours felt almost unreal, until his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. A warm but official voice greeted him. "Mr. Harper, this is Dr. Rowan from the Federal Disaster Response Program. After reviewing the puppy's scans and observing its unusual bond with you, we'd like to make a proposal. The dog is imprinted on you. We believe that connection is irreplaceable." Mark blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "You mean, we'd like you to become its permanent handler," Dr. Rowan said. "We'll provide full training and support. The puppy can continue its mission to save lives, together with you." Mark looked down at the little black dog resting by his feet, tail thumping softly against the floor as if it already understood. A quiet smile spread across his face. "Yes," he said, the word landing like a promise. The puppy gave a happy yip, leaping into his lap. In that moment, Mark realized what fate had been steering toward since the first faint whimper in the alley. This wasn't just rescue. It was the beginning of a lifelong partnership. Days later, Mark stood in the quiet backyard as dusk settled, the little black puppy racing joyful circles in the grass. The memory of that first night, its urgent cries, the hidden microchip, the stranger's knock, felt like a vivid dream. Yet the warm weight of the puppy nudging his ankle proved every moment real. He thought about how a simple evening walk had unfolded into a chain of events larger than anything he could have planned. What began as an act of kindness had led to saving a life and forging an unexpected future. The government team would return soon with training guides, but tonight belonged only to them. The puppy bounded back and rested at his feet, looking up with bright, trusting eyes. Mark smiled, feeling a quiet certainty settle in his chest. One ordinary night had changed everything, and the adventure he knew was only just beginning.